Morning, all. All right, we just have two games today on Easter. I find it odd that they had Good Friday off, and I understand, like, well, it's a religious holiday. Well, yeah, but you have 15 games, 14 games on Thursday, and then 16 games on Saturday. So how much of a day off was Friday? I mean, it's not like they had time to get on a plane, go home, have dinner with family, and all this. Anyways, anyways, so two games today. Starting at 6 o'clock Eastern, 3 o'clock Pacific, we got the Boston Bruins and Philadelphia Flyers. And Boston has a chance to make history, right? They're 62, 12, and 5. You kept waiting for them to fall apart and things to just, you know, have their normal downbeat during a season. But really, we haven't seen that with Boston. Their last 10 games, they're 9-1. They've won 5 in a row. On the Philadelphia side, they're 29, 37, and 13. Their last 10 games, they're 4-5-1, but they've lost 5 in a row. Philadelphia at this point is number 7 in the draft lottery standings. So not a lot on the line here other than Boston trying to make history for the most wins in an NHL season. Then we've got Colorado and Anaheim. So this one's at 8:30 Eastern, 5:30 Pacific. So if you want to watch all the hockey today, you can watch all the hockey. Colorado 48, 24, and 6 is their overall record. Their last 10 games are 8-2. They've won 4 in a row. There was a little bit of good fortune that smiled on them last night in that win over LA. We'll see if it smiles on them again today or if they even need it. Anaheim, 23, 45, and 11 overall. Their last 10 games are 0-9-1. Their last game was yesterday, of course, against Arizona, where they lost in overtime. I thought they were going to win for a bit there, but yeah, they did lose that one in overtime in a thriller of a game right there. So for Anaheim, they're playing out the string, but they're now, with that 1 point yesterday, they moved from number 1 in the draft lottery standings to number 3. So they damaged their draft lottery standings, and as I've been saying, players don't care about the draft lottery standings. But I guarantee that there's somebody in the Anaheim organization that was like, we just had to get a point. We just had to get a point, didn't we? Now we're not number 1 anymore. All right, so that being said, we're going to switch out, go now to the news of the day. Connor McDavid passing 150 points. Absolutely fantastic to be a witness to this. And you know what it reminds me of is I remember when I was a kid and Gretzky had 164 points. And I remember being told by my grandfather that those numbers were ridiculous and he would never hit that again. And being told about how great all the greats were and how Gretzky wasn't really that good. And everything was all watered down nowadays. And it's a lot of it's similar to stuff that you hear now. So it's part of the reason why when people say that stuff now, I go, yeah, sure, I heard that over 40 years ago. So anyways, yeah, McDavid is producing at a rate that we haven't seen in a very long time, and I think it's fantastic. I do. Now, one player who would have produced this way if the scoring had been where it is now when he was younger is Sidney Crosby. Now, Crosby currently sits at, I think it's at 91 points. That's not too shabby. And I think he's the number 1 scorer amongst players 35 years or older. I think the last time a player had more than 90 points at this stage in their career at this age was Marty St. Louis. I think I saw that yesterday during the game. But Crosby yesterday reaches 1,500 career points, which again doesn't happen very often. I think he's the 4th fastest to get there. So yeah, Crosby, absolutely remarkable career. One of the greatest of all time. McDavid's place in that conversation, I think, will likely be decided by how teams perform in the playoffs with him on them. And whether that's fair or not, we've had that discussion before. There have been plenty of Hall of Famers who may not have won a Stanley Cup, but the Stanley Cups are important too. So at any rate, the conversation about McDavid and Crosby, I would say Crosby's the better all-around player, but Crosby's also a lot older. And as McDavid gets older, I've noticed his game, his all-around, his 200-foot game does get better every year. So yeah, I just feel like I'm honored to stand here in front of all you fine people wearing a McDavid jersey and talk about these guys. It's great. Now, coming out of last night's action, the Seattle Kraken, they're a little bit closer to 3rd place. So it looked like that was something that wasn't going to happen. 2 weeks ago, there's no way that I would have been talking about Seattle maybe finishing 3rd, but they're only 2 points behind the Kings, and the Kings had a rough week. So another rough week could put the Kings into a wild card spot. They could end up against Colorado in the first round. That could be a thing. And as I said in last night's recap, I'll say it again here. Sign me up. I am totally fine with that. I don't have a problem with that at all. I would say that coming out of that game last night, Colorado and LA would quite enjoy a series against one another, or they'd hate it. But either way, Depends on how you look at it. But yeah, so Seattle's made things interesting in the Pacific, just when things seem to be, settling down a little bit here and there. Just that the Kings aren't in the hunt for first. Well, maybe they're going to end up in a wild card spot. So this is kind of making the rounds this morning. Last night, Toronto puts in their emergency backup goaltender for the last minute and 10. And I thought, well, that's a nice moment. Like earlier this year, we saw the Oilers do this. And it's nice. And I've seen, there was one I saw too that a Leafs fan corrected and said, hey, amateur tryout. Not an Ebug. He's an amateur tryout. Tomato, tomato. So the reality is that, the game was completely out of hand. Montreal had been absolutely decimated. And it comes back to this unspoken code that I don't understand. So Chris Wideman of Montreal said after the game, they'll get what they deserve in a few weeks. Now, you could read this a few ways of looking at it. Now, a few weeks from now, you could read that as being, okay, so he thinks the Leafs are going to get out of the first round. Well, that's nice. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is, oh, they're going to get knocked out in the playoffs. Yeah, dude, you're not in the playoffs. Like I could see this from a team that didn't get blown out 7-1, but they got blown out 7-1. That's why Toronto was able to put in the emergency backup goaltender. And, it's one of these things that, and I'm paraphrasing here, but you hear this a lot in hockey circles. You got to respect the other team. You got to show that. Why are you putting out your first unit power play with 3 minutes left when you're up 8-0? Why didn't you put out your third and fourth liners? Don't try to score again. And it's odd because when we look at goal differential, usually the teams with the really high goal differential are the ones that are high in the standings. Now, that's because they're winning, but also because they're the teams more likely to have those no mercy games. So at the end of the year, I want to go through and count up the no mercy games and see who had the most, both for and against, because I think it shows a lot about the teams that have that killer instinct and want to go out and play a full 60 minutes. I don't have a problem with a team, going out there and taking a team out 11, 12, nothing, if that's the case. The one thing that I find interesting too is the idea that, well, you've got to take your foot off the gas. How many multi-goal comebacks have we seen this year? When do you take your foot off the gas? Do you take your foot off the gas halfway through the third? Well, there's only 10 minutes left. I just find the whole conversation really, really odd. And the idea that somehow putting in the emergency backup goaltender isn't showing respect to the other team. Jeff Villette put it correctly where he said, so wait a minute, you can't put out your first unit. You have to put out your scrubs for the power play. But if you put in your emergency backup goaltender instead of your starter, then you're not respecting the other team. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It really doesn't. And I find it really, really bizarre how the NHL has this, both with players and with fans. Because again, if Montreal didn't want to be disrespected, they should have kept the game close. If that game had been 2-1 or 3-1, yeah, Jed Alexander's not going in the net. But it's a good story. And I think it's a shame that a National Hockey League player who's a millionaire, he's been in the league for a while, would look down his nose at a guy getting into a minute and 10 seconds of action where he didn't face a shot. Like, if Montreal was really that upset about it, maybe you should have got a shot on him or something, right? And they didn't. So I find the whole thing bizarre because the respect the other team thing. I mean, this is a game where there's hits. You can get hits in the head. There's fighting, roughing, and just various things going on most whistles in this league sometimes. Some games there's scrums on almost every whistle where you could call a penalty almost the entire game. So I don't have a problem with an emergency backup goaltender going in. And it wouldn't matter who did it, and it wouldn't matter who they were against. I think it's a good story. And it doesn't have to be that the goaltender goes in because somebody else got hurt. I think it can be a good story just because, the team looks and goes, hey, this kid's here at the end of the bench. And although not all benches have room for the backup goalies in the NHL, it's one of the weird things about the National Hockey League. But yeah, you can take it so that, hey, for the last minute, why don't you go out and take the net? And I think it's great. And you know what? I think the Leafs thought it was great too. And again, if you don't want that to happen, don't lose the game 7-1. I find it odd. And again, Montreal's been pretty much tanked from the start of the season, by which I mean it's not the players on the ice as much as this management making that decision that, hey, we're in a rebuild here. And so they did the right thing by being in that rebuild, and that's how you end up getting blown out 7-1 as well. But it's not something worth hating the Leafs for. I just find that so weird. I just find that so odd because I didn't think anything of it last night when they put him in. Same as I didn't think anything of it when the Oilers did it earlier in the season. I thought it was a nice story. And it's something fans like. And not only that, but for the National Hockey League, which is always, hey, how are we going to get into mainstream minds in the U.S. and how are we going to get more attention? David Ayres got a ton of mainstream media attention when that happened a couple years ago. I guess more than a couple years ago now, isn't it? But at any rate, when David Ayres went in, it was big news. And he went in there and he won the game, and it was this great tour. And so I think having an emergency backup goaltender in there and making it look like at any point in time you can end up in a situation where a guy's in the net that people may not know who it is. He may never get another game in the NHL again. I don't have a problem with it. I think it's a good story because it sends a message that things can be a little bit topsy-turvy in the National Hockey League. And I know there's people who are going to say, well, it looks Bush League. We've talked before about, the NHL maybe expanding it so you can have that third goaltender on your roster, have it not count towards the cap, and have it be your emergency backup. Like Boston's emergency backup, was it last year? It was Tuukka Rask. Yeah, it was fun. Great, fine. So, yeah, the emergency backup's in. Oh, my gosh. So, imagine if the Rangers had King Henrik as their emergency backup. But at any rate, I don't have a problem with it. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Especially with the when do you take your foot off the gas? And again, in the NHL, the way it's being played now, I don't think you do. I really think that with the game and how quickly leads can disappear, with how quickly teams can put strings of goals together, and momentum is huge, I don't think you take your foot off the gas. I think if you can win a game 8-1, you go out and you win it 8-1. It's a heck of a lot better than being ahead 5-1 and going, oh, that's enough, and then barely holding on to win 5-4. Because once you've taken your foot off the gas, it can be kind of tough to get back in the motion and get that intensity back. So, yeah. And I also think that's kind of a sign of disrespect, too. And for the team on the other side, they'll be like, oh, cool, so they're just resting everybody. Let's score some goals here. So I think an argument can be made either way. Let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.